She was forced to marry an arrogant tycoon, but she was shocked by his dark secret. The church bells rang like a death knell. Julie stood at the altar in a dress she didn't choose, about to marry a man she'd never spoken to. Peter Ashford, the billionaire tycoon whose cold eyes held secrets that could destroy her. The deal was simple. 2 years of fake marriage to save her family from bankruptcy, then freedom. But on their wedding night, she discovered the scars covering his body, the sister who vanished 6 years ago, and the dangerous criminal hunting them both. Peter didn't marry her to save her father's company. He married her to save her life. Now, caught between a contract and real feelings, between safety and love, Julie must decide: run from the man with deadly secrets, or stand beside him and fight the monster who destroyed his family. Because in Peter Ashford's world, love is the most dangerous weapon of all. The church bells rang like a death knell. Julie stood at the end of the aisle, her fingers clutching the ivory silk of her wedding dress so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, expensive, suffocating, borrowed. Everything about this moment was wrong. The flowers were too perfect, their scent cloying and artificial. The guests were strangers wearing rehearsed smiles. And at the altar, waiting with the patience of a predator, stood Peter Ashford. She had seen his face 1,000 times in magazines, on billboards, in the financial sections of newspapers her father left scattered around the house. Peter Ashford, the youngest billionaire to take over Ashford Industries, the man who turned failing companies into empires, the tycoon whose name alone could shift stock markets. He was 33, ruthlessly successful, and according to every article she'd ever read, utterly merciless in business. And now, he was about to become her husband. This isn't real, she told herself, a mantra she'd been repeating since her father had delivered the news 3 weeks ago. This is a nightmare. You'll wake up. But the organ music swelled, and her father's hand pressed against the small of her back, a push disguised as guidance. She forced her feet to move, one step, then another. The aisle stretched endlessly before her, a walk toward a future she hadn't chosen and didn't want. Before we continue with Julie's story, if you're enjoying this cinematic tale of forbidden marriage and dangerous secrets, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Peter's eyes found hers across the distance. They were dark. Not brown, but something deeper, almost black in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. There was no warmth in them, no tenderness, just calculation. She felt like a piece on a chessboard, moved into position by forces beyond her control. Her father had explained it all with the detached efficiency of a business transaction. The family company was drowning in debt. Bankruptcy loomed like a guillotine. Peter Ashford had made an offer. He would absorb the debt, save her father's legacy, protect the jobs of 200 employees. The price? A marriage contract. 2 years. A public partnership that would benefit both their images. Him, softening his reputation as a cold corporate shark. Her family, gaining the protection of the Ashford name. It's not forever, her father had said, unable to meet her eyes. Just 2 years. Then you can divorce quietly. No one gets hurt. Except me, she had wanted to scream. I get hurt. But she had looked at her father's face. The lines of exhaustion, the gray pallor of stress, the trembling hands that betrayed how close he was to losing everything. And she had swallowed her protest. She had always been the good daughter, the obedient one, the one who put family first. So here she was, 25 years old, walking toward a man she'd never spoken to, about to promise her life to someone who had bought her like a corporate asset. The distance closed, the music crescendoed, and then she was standing beside him. Peter turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw him up close. He was taller than she'd expected, his presence commanding even in stillness. The tailored black suit fit him like armor, emphasizing broad shoulders and a frame that spoke of controlled power. His jaw was sharp, clean-shaven, the kind of masculine beauty that should have been softened by some imperfection but wasn't. Everything about him was precise, calculated, intimidating. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Not from attraction, but from the cold intelligence she saw there. He was studying her the way a scientist might study a specimen under glass. Assessing. Analyzing. She felt stripped bare despite the layers of silk and lace. "Julie," he said, and his voice was exactly what she'd imagined. Deep, controlled, with the faint rasp of someone who rarely needed to raise it to command attention. Her name in his mouth sounded strange, too intimate for a man she didn't know. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would show him she wasn't a passive victim in this arrangement. But her throat had closed, and all she could manage was a slight nod. The ceremony began. The priest's words washed over her like white noise. She heard herself responding at the appropriate moments, her voice sounding foreign and distant. Peter's responses were crisp, efficient, as if he were closing a business deal rather than entering a marriage. Perhaps to him there was no difference. "You may kiss the bride." Her stomach dropped. She had known this moment was coming, had braced herself for it. But now that it was here, panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. She looked up at Peter, searching his face for some sign of how to navigate this. But his expression remained unreadable. He stepped closer. One of his hands came up to cup her cheek. The touch was warm, his palm rough in a way that surprised her. For a man who lived behind desks and in boardrooms, his hands felt like they'd known work. The thought unsettled her, adding another layer to the mystery of who Peter Ashford actually was beneath the carefully constructed public image. "Breathe," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. It wasn't kindness exactly, but it wasn't cruelty either. More like the instruction one might give a skittish horse. And then he kissed her. It was brief, chaste, nothing more than a press of lips that lasted barely 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, Julie felt the world tilt. His mouth was firm against hers, not demanding, but not tentative either. There was a confidence in the gesture that made her realize with startling clarity that Peter Ashford was a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, exactly when he wanted it. When he pulled back, his eyes locked on hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Something flickered in their depths, something she couldn't name. Then it was gone, shuttered behind that impenetrable mask of control. The church erupted in polite applause. Julie forced herself to smile, to turn toward the crowd of strangers and pretend this was a happy occasion. Peter's hand found the small of her back, guiding her down the aisle. His touch was possessive, a statement of ownership that made her spine stiffen. Outside, the late afternoon sun was too bright, too cheerful for the prison sentence she'd just agreed to. A black car waited at the curb. Not a limousine, but something sleek and expensive that probably cost more than her family's house. Peter opened the door himself. Another surprise. She had expected him to have people for that. "After you, Mrs. Ashford," he said, and there was the faintest edge of something in his tone. Amusement? Mockery? She couldn't tell. She slid into the leather interior, and Peter followed, the door closing with a solid thunk that felt far too final. The driver pulled away from the church, and Julie watched through the tinted windows as the building, and her old life, disappeared behind them. Silence filled the car, thick and suffocating. Julie kept her gaze fixed on the passing scenery, unwilling to look at the man beside her. She could feel him watching her, could sense the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Her pulse hammered in her throat. "You're angry," Peter said finally, his voice cutting through the quiet. She turned to face him, surprised by the directness. "Wouldn't you be?" One corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile, but looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "Probably. Though I confess, I'm curious what you're more angry about. The marriage itself, or the fact that you agreed to it. The observation was too accurate, too cutting." She felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and fury. "I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Julie. You chose your father's comfort over your own freedom. That's not the same as having no choice." She wanted to slap him. The urge was so strong that her hand actually twitched. But something in his eyes stopped her. A challenge, perhaps, or maybe a test. He was waiting to see what she would do, how she would react. She refused to give him the satisfaction. "Where are we going?" she asked instead, forcing her voice to remain level. Home. My apartment in the city. He paused, then added, Our apartment, I suppose. For the next 2 years. The words sent a chill down her spine. 2 years. 730 days of living with this stranger, of pretending to be his wife in public while maintaining whatever cold détente they would establish in private. It felt impossible, insurmountable. The car turned onto a tree-lined street in the most expensive part of the city, pulling up to a building that was all glass and steel and intimidating modernity. A doorman opened the car door with practiced efficiency, greeting Peter by name. They rode the elevator in silence to the penthouse, the numbers climbing higher and higher until Julie felt dizzy from more than just altitude. The apartment was exactly what she'd expected. Minimalist, expensive, impersonal. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that would have been breathtaking if she weren't so numb. Everything was in shades of gray and black and chrome, sterile and cold. Your room is down that hall, Peter said, gesturing to the left. My bedroom is on the opposite side. There's a guest room, an office, a gym. The kitchen is fully stocked, though I'm rarely here to use it. You're free to do whatever you want with the space. Redecorate if it pleases you. He was giving her the tour like she was a new tenant, not his wife. The clinical distance should have been a relief, but instead, it made her feel hollow. What are the rules? She heard herself ask. Peter turned to face her fully, and for the first time since the ceremony, his mask slipped slightly. She saw something raw beneath it, something that looked almost like resignation. Rules? For the next 2 years, what do you expect from me? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with that unnerving intensity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, almost thoughtful. Public appearances when required. Discretion about the nature of our arrangement. And privacy, mine and yours. Beyond that, he shrugged, a gesture that seemed oddly vulnerable coming from someone so controlled. I'm not interested in making you miserable, Julie. That wasn't part of the deal. But controlling my life was? I'm controlling a situation. There's a difference. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Not from where I'm standing. Something shifted in his expression. A tightening around his eyes, a hardening of his jaw. For a second, she thought she'd pushed too far, that she was about to see the ruthless tycoon everyone whispered about. But then he simply nodded, as if acknowledging a fair point. You're right. From your perspective, I'm sure this feels like a cage. He moved to the windows, staring out at the glittering city below. For what it's worth, it's not what I would have chosen either. The admission surprised her. She wanted to ask what he meant. Why a man with unlimited power and resources would agree to a marriage contract. What possible benefit this arrangement gave him. But the exhaustion of the day crashed over her suddenly, making her limbs feel heavy and her mind foggy. I need to be alone, she said, and hated how her voice cracked on the last word. Peter turned back to her, and for just a moment, his expression softened into something that might have been understanding. Of course. I have work to do anyway. We'll talk more tomorrow. She fled to the room he'd indicated, closing the door behind her and leaning against it like it could protect her from the reality of what she'd just done. The room was beautiful, decorated in soft creams and golds that were warmer than the rest of the apartment. Someone had already brought her belongings, the few suitcases looking pathetically small against the massive space. Julie crossed to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city pulsed with life. People living their normal lives, free to make their own choices, unburdened by the weight of family obligation and debt. She had never felt more trapped. But beneath the fear and the anger, something else stirred. Curiosity. Peter Ashford was not what she'd expected. The cold tycoon from the magazines was there, certainly. But there were cracks in the facade. The rough hands. The almost vulnerable shrug. The admission that this wasn't his choice either. What dark secret was hidden beneath that carefully controlled exterior? And why, despite everything, did she find herself wanting to know? What have I gotten myself into? The question hung in the air, unanswered. And as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Julie couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just become far more complicated than a simple contract marriage. Something was coming, She could feel it in the air, in the weight of Peter's silences, in the shadows that seemed to lurk in the corners of this pristine apartment. Whatever Peter Ashford's secret was, she suspected she would learn it soon. And when she did, nothing would ever be the same. Julie didn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows from passing cars stretched and contracted across the pristine white surface. The sheets were expensive, Egyptian cotton probably, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent used to. They should have been comfortable. Instead, they felt like a shroud. Every sound in the apartment seemed amplified in the darkness. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city below, and underneath it all, a sound she couldn't quite identify. A low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the building itself. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. The silk nightgown she'd packed felt absurdly delicate, so she pulled on a cardigan over it and padded barefoot into the hallway. The apartment was dark, except for a thin line of light coming from beneath one of the doors on the opposite side. Peter's office, if she remembered the brief tour correctly. She should have gone back to her room. Privacy, he'd said. That was one of his rules. But curiosity pulled at her like a tide, and before she could talk herself out of it, she was moving down the hall toward that sliver of light. The thumping sound grew louder as she approached, not coming from the office, but from somewhere beyond it. She pressed her ear against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silence, then a sharp crack that made her flinch, the sound of something hitting something else with force. Her hand moved to the doorknob before her brain could catch up. It turned easily, unlocked. The door swung open on silent hinges. The office was empty. Papers covered the massive desk in organized chaos, a laptop screen glowing with what looked like financial reports. But the room itself was vacant, and the sounds were coming from another door on the far wall, one she hadn't noticed during the tour. It stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling from the gap. Turn around. Go back to bed. This is none of your business. But her feet carried her forward anyway. She crossed the office, each step feeling like a betrayal of Peter's trust and her own sense of self-preservation. The sounds grew clearer, breathing, heavy and controlled, punctuated by those sharp cracks. Not violence, she realized. Something else. She reached the door and peered through the gap. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the apartment. Where everything else was glass and chrome and cold modernity, this space was raw, exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, rubber flooring. And in the center, surrounded by heavy bags and training equipment, was Peter. He was shirtless, his back to her, his body moving with fluid precision as his fists connected with a punching bag. Each hit was controlled, powerful, the bag swinging wildly from the force. Sweat gleamed on his skin, tracing the lines of muscles she hadn't known existed beneath his tailored suits. But it wasn't his physique that made her breath catch. It was the scars. They crisscrossed his back in a pattern that spoke of violence, of pain endured and survived. Some were old, faded to white lines against tanned skin. Others were newer, still pink and raised. They formed a map of suffering she couldn't begin to decipher. Peter's fist connected with the bag again, and this time she heard him exhale, a sound somewhere between exertion and anguish. He wasn't just working out. He was fighting something invisible and internal and desperate. She must have made a sound, a gasp, a shift of fabric, because suddenly he froze. His shoulders tensed, every muscle going rigid. And then, slowly, he turned. His eyes found hers across the distance, and the expression on his face was one she would never forget. Not anger, though she'd expected that. Not embarrassment at being caught in a vulnerable moment. It was fear. Raw, undisguised fear that transformed his features into something almost unrecognizable. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with tension, with unspoken questions and the weight of secrets laid bare. Julie wanted to apologize, to retreat, to pretend she hadn't seen. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped beneath the enormity of what she'd just witnessed. Peter moved first. He grabbed a towel from a nearby bench and draped it over his shoulders, covering the scars, his movements sharp and defensive. When he spoke, His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the strain beneath it. "You should be sleeping." "I couldn't." Her own voice came out barely above a whisper. "I thought." "You thought what? That I was hurting someone?" The words were laced with bitterness. "Or that someone was hurting me?" She flinched at the accuracy of the second guess. "I didn't mean to intrude, You just what, Julie?" He moved toward her, his bare feet silent on the rubber flooring. "Decided that privacy didn't apply to you? That the rules I set were suggestions?" She should have been intimidated. He was taller, stronger, radiating barely contained anger. But all she could see were those scars, the fear in his eyes, the way his hands were trembling slightly despite his controlled tone. This wasn't a man in control. This was a man barely holding himself together. "What happened to you?" she asked, and was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Peter stopped mid-stride, as if her words had physically struck him. His jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. For a moment, she thought he might actually answer. But then the mask slammed back into place. That cold, impenetrable facade she'd seen at the wedding. "Nothing that concerns you. We're married. Doesn't that make it my concern?" "We have a contract," he corrected, his voice like ice. "A business arrangement. My past is not part of the deal." She took a step toward him, surprising them both. "Then why did you agree to this? A man like you. You could have solved my father's problems without chaining yourself to a stranger. So why did you do it?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Anger, frustration, something that looked almost like pain, before he shuddered them all away. "Because sometimes the chains we choose are preferable to the ones we're given," he said finally, and his voice was so quiet she almost missed it. Before she could respond, he moved past her, his shoulder brushing hers in the narrow doorway. The brief contact sent electricity racing across her skin, a reminder that despite everything, Peter Ashford was very much a real person, warm, solid, unsettlingly present. "Go to bed, Julie," he said without turning around, "and stay out of places you're not invited." She stood frozen in the doorway of his secret room, listening to his footsteps retreat across the office. A door closed somewhere in the apartment, his bedroom, probably, and then silence. Julie looked back at the training room, at the punching bag still swaying slightly from the force of his last hit, at the equipment that spoke of violence, of preparation, of someone who needed to know how to fight. Who had Peter been before he became the cold tycoon? What had put those scars on his back? And why did a man with everything look so haunted? She retreated to her own room but didn't return to bed. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to the pale gold of dawn. Her mind churned with questions, with the image of Peter's scarred back, with the fear she'd seen in his eyes. This isn't just a contract marriage, she realized. This is something else entirely. Something dangerous. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange spark of something she couldn't quite name. Not attraction exactly, but something close to it. Something that recognized the pain in Peter and wanted to understand it, even if understanding meant uncovering truths she wasn't ready for. By the time she emerged from her room at 8, dressed in jeans and a sweater that felt defiant after yesterday's wedding gown, Peter was already in the kitchen. He wore slacks and a crisp white shirt, his hair damp from a shower, every inch the polished businessman. If not for the shadows under his eyes, she might have thought last night was a dream. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral. "Coffee?" The mundane question felt absurd after everything that had passed between them hours ago. "Please." He poured her a cup with practiced efficiency, sliding it across the marble counter. Their fingers didn't touch, but she felt the deliberate distance he was maintaining. A wall rebuilt brick by brick. "We need to discuss our public schedule," Peter said, his voice all business. "There's a charity gala this weekend. We're expected to attend as a couple." Expected by whom? By everyone who invested in this arrangement. Your father's creditors, my board of directors, the society pages. He took a sip of his own coffee, his eyes unreadable over the rim. "This only works if we sell it, Julie. If we look like a real couple, we barely know each other. Then we'll learn, quickly. He set down his cup, and she noticed the slight bruising on his knuckles, evidence of last night's violence against the punching bag. I've prepared a file for you. My history, my preferences, my habits. Everything you'd need to know to convincingly play the role of my wife. I'll need the same from you. The clinical approach should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like another prison. And if I don't want to play along? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Your father's debt doesn't disappear just because you're having second thoughts, Julie. The contract is binding. 2 years. You agreed to this. Under duress. Under pressure. There's a difference. He leaned against the counter, his posture deceptively casual. But if you want out, I won't stop you. Break the contract. Walk away. Just understand that the consequences fall on your family, not on me. It was a threat wrapped in reasonable words. She wanted to hate him for it. But she could see the exhaustion in his face, the tension in his shoulders. Peter Ashford was playing a role too, she realized. The cold tycoon was armor, protection against something that had hurt him badly enough to leave those scars. What are you so afraid of? She asked softly. The question clearly caught him off guard. His mask slipped for just a second, and she saw something vulnerable and raw. Then it was gone. The gala is Saturday. I'll have a stylist come by Thursday to help you choose something appropriate. My driver will take you anywhere you need to go. Credit cards are in the top drawer of the desk in your room. Use them. He was retreating, deflecting, building distance. She recognized the tactic, because she'd used it herself countless times. It was easier to keep people at arm's length than to let them see the broken parts. Peter, I have meetings all day. He interrupted, already moving toward the door. We'll talk more tonight. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the too-perfect kitchen with her cooling coffee and more questions than answers. Julie spent the day exploring the apartment, mapping its spaces and secrets. She found Peter's file on the desk in her room, a thick folder containing his biography, his business interests, even a list of his favorite foods and wines. It read like a dossier on a stranger, impersonal and cold. But she also found the things the file didn't mention. A bookshelf in the living room filled with worn paperbacks, thrillers and mysteries, the kind with dog-eared pages and cracked spines that spoke of being read multiple times. A framed photograph tucked behind other frames, showing a younger Peter with a woman who had his same dark eyes and sharp cheekbones. His mother, maybe, or a sister. The training room with its heavy bags and that lingering scent of sweat, and something darker. Fear, perhaps. Or memory. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle, but the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. When Peter returned that evening, she was waiting in the living room with 2 glasses of wine and a decision. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, surprise flickering across his face before the mask settled back into place. We need to talk, she said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. Really talk. Not about schedules or public appearances. About what this actually is. He hesitated, and she could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Then, slowly, he crossed the room and took the offered glass. He didn't sit, but he didn't leave either. It was progress. What happened last night? He started. You don't have to explain, Julie interrupted. I'm not asking you to tell me everything. I know I don't have that right. But Peter, if we're going to do this, if we're going to live together and pretend to be married and fool everyone who's watching, we need to at least be honest about the fact that we're both trapped. You said this wasn't your choice either. What did you mean? The question hung between them. Peter stared into his wine glass, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Sometimes you make deals to survive. Sometimes survival means giving up freedom. He looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it made her chest ache. We're not so different, you and I. We're both trying to protect the people we love. We're both paying prices we never wanted to pay. What price are you paying, Peter? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, if I tell you, everything changes. You'll look at me differently. And this arrangement, however cold, however transactional, it will become something else. Something more complicated. Maybe complicated is better than lonely, she said softly. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw him fully. Not the tycoon, not the mysterious stranger, but the man underneath, scared, exhausted, desperately trying to hold together a life that was fracturing at the seams. Be careful what you wish for, Julie, he said, and his voice carried a warning. My secrets aren't pretty. They're dark and dangerous, and once you know them, you can't unknow them. Try me. The words were a challenge, a promise, a threshold they were both aware of crossing. Peter set down his wineglass and moved to the window, his back to her, that scarred back hidden beneath expensive fabric, carrying pain she was only beginning to understand. I'm not who you think I am, he said finally. The man in the magazines, the ruthless businessman. That's a role, a mask. The truth is messier, darker. Julie's pulse quickened. She stood, moving closer but not touching. Then, tell me the truth. Peter's reflection in the window looked haunted, his features sharp in the city lights below. I will, but not tonight. Tonight, I need you to understand that once this door opens, there's no closing it. You'll be part of something that could destroy you. Maybe I'm stronger than I look. He turned then, and the look he gave her was appraising, searching, as if seeing her for the first time. Maybe you are, he said quietly. But strength doesn't make you immune to danger, Julie. And the people in my life, the people who get close, they have a habit of getting hurt. The confession sent chills down her spine. This wasn't metaphorical. Peter wasn't talking about emotional wounds. He was talking about real danger, real threats. What have you gotten yourself into? She whispered. The question, Peter said, moving close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, is what have you gotten yourself into? His hand came up, and for a moment she thought he might touch her face. Instead, he pulled back at the last second, curling his fingers into a fist. The restraint was deliberate, painful. Get some sleep, Julie. Tomorrow we start playing the happy couple. And soon, very soon, you'll understand why this marriage wasn't just about debt. It was about survival. He left her standing there, her heart racing, her mind spinning with implications and warnings and the terrible, thrilling realization that she'd just married a man with secrets that could get them both killed. Outside, the city glittered with 1,000 lights. Beautiful. Dangerous. Just like the man who was now her husband. And as Julie finally returned to her room, one thought echoed through her mind. What have I done? Thursday came faster than Julie expected. She spent the intervening days in a strange limbo, inhabiting the apartment like a ghost, crossing paths with Peter only at carefully orchestrated moments. Breakfast at 8, always brief and painfully polite. Dinner at 7 when he wasn't working late, which was most nights. Conversations that skimmed the surface of everything important, never diving deep enough to touch the truth he'd promised to reveal. The stylist arrived at 10 in the morning with an entourage and enough garment bags to dress a small army. Her name was Vivienne, all sharp cheekbones and sharper observations, the kind of woman who could assess your entire life story with a single glance. So you're the one who caught Peter Ashford, she said, laying out dresses across the guest room bed with practiced efficiency. Each one was more beautiful and more expensive than the last. I have to say, you're not what I expected. Julie bristled at the phrasing. I didn't catch anyone. It's just a marriage of convenience. Yes, darling, the rumors are already circulating. Vivienne held up a midnight blue gown, considered it against Julie's skin tone, then discarded it. The question everyone's asking is why. Peter's been dodging marriage proposals from Manhattan's finest families for years. Then suddenly he marries the daughter of a failed businessman in a ceremony so rushed it made people wonder if there was a baby involved. The word stung, even though Julie had expected exactly this kind of speculation. There's no baby. I know. If there were, we'd be dressing you very differently. Vivienne pulled out a crimson dress, this one with a neckline that managed to be both modest and devastating. Try this one. Julie took the dress mechanically, her mind still caught on Vivienne's words. Dodging marriage proposals for years. So Peter hadn't just been uninterested in marriage, he'd been actively avoiding it, which made his agreement to marry her even more confusing. What could possibly be worth giving up the freedom he'd apparently guarded so carefully? The dress fit perfectly, clinging to her figure in ways that made her feel simultaneously powerful and exposed. Vivienne circled her like a predator, adjusting a seam here, a fold there, her eyes calculating. "You'll do," she said finally, and it sounded almost like approval. "The gala tomorrow will be your debut as Mrs. Ashford. Everyone will be watching, judging, looking for cracks in the facade." She met Julie's eyes in the mirror, her expression surprisingly gentle. "My advice? Don't try to be someone you're not. Peter chose you for a reason. Trust that." "But he didn't choose me," Julie wanted to say. "He chose a solution to a problem." Vivienne left at noon with instructions for hair and makeup, a collection of jewelry that required its own security escort, and shoes that cost more than Julie's college tuition. The apartment fell quiet again, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. She was standing at the window, staring out at the city without really seeing it, when she heard the front door open. Too early for Peter. He never came home before 6. Her pulse quickened as footsteps moved through the apartment, purposeful and unfamiliar. Julie turned from the window just as a man appeared in the doorway of the living room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-gray hair and eyes that were far too alert for someone his age. He wore a dark suit that screamed security or law enforcement, and there was a bulge under his left arm that made Julie's mouth go dry. A gun. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice gravelly and measured. "I apologize for startling you. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm Peter's head of security." Security. Peter had security that came with guns and entered the apartment without knocking. The pieces of the puzzle were rearranging themselves in her mind, forming a picture that was becoming increasingly disturbing. "Peter didn't mention you," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "He wouldn't. Peter prefers to keep certain aspects of his life compartmentalized." Marcus moved into the room with the careful awareness of someone trained to assess threats. "But given recent developments, he thought it was time you and I met." "Recent developments?" Marcus's expression darkened. "There was an incident last night. Someone tried to access the building's security system. They were good, professional level. We caught them, but..." He paused, weighing his words. "It's not the first attempt. And it won't be the last." The room felt suddenly colder. "Someone's trying to get to Peter? Someone's trying to get to both of you now." Marcus pulled out a phone, showing her a photograph. It was grainy, clearly from a security camera, but the image was unmistakable. A man in dark clothing, his face obscured, standing across the street from the building. This was taken 3 nights ago. Same man was spotted yesterday outside your father's office. The blood drained from Julie's face. "My father, is he safe?" "For now. We've increased security around him, though he doesn't know it. Peter was very clear that your family shouldn't be alarmed." Marcus pocketed the phone, his gaze sharp. "But you need to understand the reality of the situation, Mrs. Ashford. You're not just Peter's wife on paper. You're a target now. Anyone who wants to hurt him will look at you as a vulnerability." Julie's legs felt weak. She sank onto the sofa, her mind racing. Who are these people? What do they want? "That's complicated." Marcus sat across from her, his posture still alert despite the casual gesture. "Peter's businesses are legitimate, but he's made enemies, rival companies he's absorbed, deals that left people bankrupt. And then there's..." He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before revealing too much. "Then there's what?" Julie pressed. Marcus studied her for a long moment, something like sympathy crossing his weathered features. "That's not my story to tell. But Peter asked me to brief you on security protocols. Starting tomorrow at the gala, you'll have a detail. They'll be discreet, but they'll be there. And there are rules you need to follow." He spent the next 20 minutes outlining a list of precautions that made Julie's head spin. Never leave the building without alerting security. Never take the same route twice. Be aware of exits in every room. Trust no one who approached her without verification. It was the kind of briefing someone might give to a witness in protective custody, not to a newlywed. "Is this what Peter's life is always like?" she asked when Marcus finally finished. "Living like he's under siege?" "Peter's life is unique," Marcus said carefully. He carries burdens most people can't imagine, and he's very good at appearing normal while managing extraordinary threats. He stood, straightening his jacket. He should be the one telling you this. But between you and me, Mrs. Ashford, I've worked for Peter for 8 years. I've seen him face down corporate sharks, hostile takeovers, even physical threats. He's one of the strongest men I know. But since he married you, I've seen something in him I haven't seen before. What? Fear. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. Not for himself, for you. Whatever his reasons for this marriage, keeping you safe has become his priority. That tells me something about who you are to him, whether he's ready to admit it or not. The words hung in the air long after Marcus left. Julie sat in the growing shadows of the afternoon, trying to reconcile the man she'd married with the picture that was emerging. Peter Ashford wasn't just a businessman with a dark past. He was someone living under constant threat, someone who needed armed security and surveillance systems and protocols for his wife's safety. What have you gotten yourself into? His words from their conversation echoed in her memory, taking on new and terrifying meaning. She was still sitting there when Peter came home at 6:30. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes immediately scanning the room as if checking for threats. Marcus was here. It wasn't a question. He told me about the man, the security breach. Peter's jaw tightened. He set down his briefcase with controlled precision, then moved to pour himself a drink from the bar cart. I was going to tell you tonight. Were you? Or were you going to keep hiding the truth until I ended up in real danger? The accusation made him flinch. He turned to face her, the glass of amber liquid untouched in his hand. The entire point of the security is to make sure you never end up in danger. That's not an answer, Peter. Julie stood, anger giving her courage. You told me this marriage was about survival. You said your secrets were dark and dangerous. But you didn't tell me I'd become a target just by signing a piece of paper. You think I wanted this? His voice was sharp, edged with something that sounded like pain. You think I wanted to drag you into the mess that is my life? Then why did you? Why not solve my father's problems from a distance? Why marry me at all? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Peter set down his glass and moved toward her, and she saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. The same look she'd glimpsed that night in the training room. Because the people who are after me don't stop at business, he said, his voice low and rough. They target families, loved ones, anyone who might be used as leverage. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the tension in every line of his body. My mother died when I was 17. My sister disappeared 6 years ago, and the man who took them, who destroyed my family, he's still out there, still hunting. The confession knocked the air from Julie's lungs. She stared at Peter, seeing the scars on his soul as clearly as she'd seen the ones on his back. The scars, she whispered, from when I tried to find my sister. I got too close, asked too many questions. They sent a message. His hand moved unconsciously to his ribs, touching the place where violence had left its mark. I learned to be more careful after that, to hide better, to build walls that couldn't be breached. But why marry me? How does that protect you? Peter's laugh was bitter, broken. It doesn't protect me. It protects you. She blinked, confusion swirling with the horror of his revelations. What? Your father's debt. It wasn't random. The people he owed money to, they're connected. To the same organization that took my sister. They were going to use that debt to get to him, to destroy your family the way they destroyed mine. He met her eyes, and the anguish there was unbearable. The marriage contract put you under my protection. It made you part of my world, which means you're protected by my security, my resources, my reputation. You became too visible, too watched, to be a quiet victim. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. You married me to save me. I married you because I couldn't save my sister, because I've spent 6 years watching families get torn apart while I hid behind boardrooms and balance sheets. His voice cracked. Because when Marcus showed me your father's file, when I saw the connections, I knew what was coming. And I couldn't... He stopped, his hands curling into fists. I couldn't let it happen again. Julie felt tears burning behind her eyes. All this time, she'd thought Peter was the villain in her story, the cold tycoon who'd bought her like a commodity. But he was something else entirely, something broken and brave and desperately trying to protect people he didn't even know. "Who are they?" she asked. "The people who did this to you." Peter's expression shuddered, fear flashing across his features. "That's a conversation for another night. Right now you need to understand that tomorrow, at the gala, we're going to be watched. Not just by society, by them. They'll be looking for weaknesses, for cracks they can exploit. We have to be perfect. And after the gala? After the gala, the real work begins." He moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. "I've spent 6 years building resources, gathering intelligence, preparing. The marriage bought me something I didn't have before, a reason to move openly. A wife to protect gives me justification for actions that would have seemed suspicious before." Understanding dawned. "I'm not just under your protection. I'm part of your plan." "You're a shield and a sword," Peter admitted quietly. "But Julie, you can still walk away. The contract can be broken. I'll make sure your father's debt disappears regardless. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." The words surprised her, but as soon as she spoke them, she knew they were true. "You saved my family. You put yourself in danger to protect people you'd never met. I'm not walking away from that." Peter turned to face her, shock and something that looked dangerously close to hope flickering across his features. "You don't know what you're saying. This could get you killed. Then you better make sure your security is as good as Marcus claims." She crossed the space between them, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand. "We're in this together now, Peter. Whether you wanted a partner or not, you have one." For a long moment he simply stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face as if looking for proof that she meant it. Then slowly, his hand came up to cup her cheek. The same gesture he'd made at their wedding, but transformed by context. This time it wasn't performance. It was real. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he murmured. "Maybe I'm both." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone in an instant. "Then God help us both." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Julie felt something shift in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. This wasn't the cold transaction they'd agreed to. This was something more dangerous and infinitely more complicated. Peter seemed to realize it too. He pulled back, but not before she saw the conflict in his eyes. "Tomorrow will be difficult," he said, his voice rough. "But we'll face it together." "Together," she echoed, and the word felt like a vow. That night, Julie lay awake again, but this time it wasn't fear keeping her conscious. It was the weight of knowledge, of understanding just how deep the waters she'd waded into truly were. Peter Ashford wasn't just a man with secrets. He was a man at war, with an enemy who'd already taken everything he loved. And now, whether she'd intended to or not, she'd become part of that war. Somewhere in the apartment, she heard the familiar sound of Peter in his training room, fists against leather, fighting demons she was only beginning to comprehend. The sound didn't frighten her anymore. Instead, it made her heart ache with empathy for the man carrying so much pain alone. Tomorrow they would face the world as husband and wife, and somewhere in that glittering crowd, an enemy would be watching. Julie closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. She had a feeling the real danger was just beginning. The ballroom glittered like a cage made of crystal and gold. Julie stood at Peter's side, her hand resting lightly in the crook of his arm, and tried not to feel like prey on display. The crimson dress Vivienne had chosen clung to her body like a second skin, elegant and exposing in equal measure. Every eye in the room had tracked their entrance, conversations pausing mid-sentence as Manhattan's elite assessed the new Mrs. Ashford. She felt Peter's muscles tense beneath her fingertips, a subtle shift that probably no one else noticed. But she was learning to read him, the micro-expressions that flickered across his face before the mask settled back into place, the way his jaw tightened when he was calculating threats, the protective stance he unconsciously adopted whenever someone approached too quickly. "Breathe," he murmured, echoing his words from their wedding. His hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "You're doing perfectly. I haven't done anything yet. You're here. That's enough." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so subtle that anyone watching would have missed it. But she felt it like an electric current, grounding and unsettling all at once. A waiter passed with champagne, and Peter smoothly acquired 2 glasses, handing her one with the practiced ease of someone who'd attended 1,000 events like this. Julie took it gratefully, needing something to do with her hands that wasn't clinging to her husband like a lifeline. Peter Ashford. A woman materialized beside them, her smile sharp and calculating. She was beautiful in the way that money could buy. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a designer gown that probably cost more than a car, jewelry that caught the light with every movement. I have to say, your wedding surprised everyone. So sudden, so unexpected. Victoria. Peter's voice was polite but cold, the tone of someone greeting an adversary rather than a friend. May I introduce my wife, Julie. Julie, this is Victoria Hartwell. Her family owns Hartwell Media. The name clicked in Julie's memory. One of Peter's rivals, a company he'd outmaneuvered in a major acquisition last year. The smile Victoria aimed at her was venomous beneath its polished surface. How lovely, Victoria said, her eyes raking over Julie with undisguised assessment. You must tell me how you two met. The story has been rather vague in the press. We prefer to keep our private life private, Peter said smoothly, his hand finding the small of Julie's back. Possessive, protective. I'm sure you understand. Oh, of course. Though one does wonder about the timing. Your company's been under such scrutiny lately. Rumors of investigations, questions about certain overseas transactions. Victoria's smile widened. A wife does provide such a wonderful distraction from unpleasant business matters, doesn't it? The accusation hung in the air, wrapped in poisonous politeness. Julie felt Peter's hand press more firmly against her back, a warning or a reassurance. She couldn't tell which. If you'll excuse us, Peter said, already guiding Julie away. We should greet the hosts. They moved through the crowd, and Julie could feel eyes following them, whispers starting in their wake. Is it always like this? She asked quietly. This is mild. Peter's voice was tight. Victoria's just testing the waters, seeing if she can rattle us. The real predators are more subtle. As if summoned by his words, a man stepped into their path. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of distinguished features that belonged on currency. But it was his eyes that made Julie's skin crawl, pale blue and cold, studying them with an intensity that felt invasive. Peter. The man's voice was cultured, smooth. And this must be the new Mrs. Ashford. How delightful to finally meet you, my dear. Peter's entire body had gone rigid beside her, every muscle locked in a stillness that screamed danger. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but Julie could hear the rage simmering beneath. Mr. Kovac, I didn't realize you'd received an invitation. Oh, I go where I please. Kovac's smile never reached those cold eyes. Surely you know that by now. His gaze shifted to Julie, and she fought the urge to step back. Your wife is lovely, Peter. Quite lovely. I do hope you're taking good care of her. There was a threat buried in those words, something dark and dangerous that made Julie's heart race. Peter moved slightly, placing himself between her and Kovac in a gesture that was both subtle and unmistakable. We were just leaving, Peter said, his voice like ice. So soon? But the evening has barely begun. Kovac's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk about old times, old debts. I have nothing to say to you. No? Not even about your sister? The words were a knife, precise and devastating. I hear there's been some new information. I thought you might be interested. Julie felt Peter's control snap, just for a second. A tremor that ran through his entire frame before he locked it down again. But Kovac had seen it too, and his smile widened like a predator scenting blood. Don't, Peter said, and his voice carried a warning that made even the nearby conversation seem to quiet. Don't say her name. Don't speak to me about her. And don't ever approach my wife again. Kovac held up his hands in mock surrender. My apologies. I meant no offense. Simply making conversation among old acquaintances. He inclined his head toward Julie. Enjoy your evening, Mrs. Ashford. And do take care. The world can be so dangerous for young women who find themselves in complicated situations. Then he was gone, melting back into the crowd as smoothly as he'd appeared. Julie realized she was shaking, her champagne glass trembling in her grip. Peter's hand covered hers, steadying it. "That was him," she whispered. "The man who—" "Not here." Peter's voice was rough, strained. "We need to leave, now." But before they could move, Marcus appeared at Peter's elbow, his expression grim. He leaned in close, speaking too quietly for anyone else to hear. "We have a problem. North exit. 2 men, possibly armed. They're not on the guest list." Peter's face went pale. He turned to Julie, and the fear in his eyes was naked, undisguised. "Stay close to me. Don't let go of my hand. Understand?" She nodded, too frightened to speak. Peter's fingers laced through hers, his grip almost painful in its intensity. Marcus took point, moving through the crowd with purposeful calm that didn't draw attention. They followed, and Julie could feel Peter's eyes constantly scanning, assessing, looking for threats. They were halfway to the east exit, the opposite direction from the men Marcus had spotted, when Julie saw him. A figure in the shadows near the service entrance, watching them with focused intensity. He was younger than Kovac, dressed in a server's uniform that didn't quite fit right. And his hand was inside his jacket, reaching for something. "Peter," she breathed, but he'd already seen. Everything happened in the space of a heartbeat. Peter pulled her behind him, his body becoming a shield. Marcus was moving, his hand inside his own jacket. The man in the server uniform pulled out. Not a gun. A phone. He raised it, pointing it at them like a weapon, and the flash went off blindingly bright. Marcus reached him in 3 strides, grabbing the phone and the man's arm in one smooth motion. There was a brief struggle, quickly subdued, and then hotel security was there, responding to some signal Julie hadn't seen Marcus give. "Just a photographer," Marcus said, returning to them with the confiscated phone. "Freelance, trying to get shots to sell to the tabloids." But his expression darkened. "He had photos of you, Peter. Not just from tonight. From weeks ago. Someone hired him to follow you." Peter's face was ashen. "How many others?" "We're checking now, but if they're using freelancers to track your movements..." Marcus didn't need to finish the sentence. If Kovac's people were using multiple photographers, multiple points of surveillance, then they were planning something big. "We're leaving," Peter said. "Get the car." They exited through the kitchen, Peter's hand never leaving Julie's. She caught glimpses of startled chefs' faces, gleaming steel counters, the smell of catering food mixing with the acrid scent of her own fear. Then they were in the service corridor, then the parking garage, and finally sliding into the back of Peter's car. The door closed, sealing them in relative safety. Peter immediately pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he sent rapid-fire messages. Julie watched him, seeing the transformation from terrified to tactical, emotion locked away behind strategy. "I'm sorry," he said finally, not looking up from his phone. "I thought we'd have more time. I thought the public nature of the event would keep them cautious. That man, Kovac, he knew about your sister." Peter's hands stilled on the phone. When he looked at her, the anguish in his eyes was devastating. "He doesn't know anything. He's baiting me. He's been doing it for years." "But what if he does? What if there really is new information? Then it's a trap." Peter's voice was flat, defeated. "That's how he works. He dangles hope, waits for you to reach for it, then closes the trap. I've learned not to bite." Julie reached out, covering his hand with hers. "But you can't stop hoping. Can you?" The question broke something in him. She saw his composure crack, his face contorting with pain he'd been holding back. "Every day for 6 years I've hoped. I've searched. I've followed every lead, chased every rumor, and every time it ends the same way. With nothing. With her still gone." "What was her name?" Julie asked softly. Peter was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Elena. Her name was Elena. She was 22 when they took her. Brilliant, kind, stubborn as hell. She wanted to be a doctor." His voice broke. "She would have been 28 next month." Would have been. I don't know if she's alive, Julie. I don't know if hoping she is makes me faithful or delusional. He pulled his hand away, wiping at his face with the heel of his palm. All I know is that Kovac has the answers, and I can't get to them without putting everyone I care about in danger. The car pulled up to their building, and Peter was immediately back in control mode, scanning the street before allowing her to exit. They rode the elevator in silence, Marcus accompanying them to the door before sweeping the apartment for threats. "All clear," he said finally. "I'll post guards in the lobby. No one gets up here without clearance." After Marcus left, Julie and Peter stood in the too quiet apartment, the adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Julie's feet ached from the heels, her dress felt suffocating, and her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. "You should get some rest," Peter said, already moving toward his office. "Tomorrow we'll regroup, figure out next steps." "Peter, wait." She caught his arm, stopping him. "You don't have to do this alone anymore. You said we're in this together. Let me help." He looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and something shifted in his expression. "You want to help me hunt the people who destroyed my family? The people who are now watching you, following you, potentially planning to use you against me?" "Yes." "That's insane." "Probably." She didn't let go. "But I'm not backing down. You saved my family, Peter. Let me help you save yours." For a long moment, he simply stared at her, conflict warring across his features. Then, slowly, his hand came up to cover hers. "You have no idea what you're offering." "Then tell me. Stop protecting me from the truth and tell me everything." Peter's jaw clenched, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for certainty he couldn't find in himself. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay, but not tonight. Tonight we're both too raw, too shaken. Tomorrow. I'll tell you everything tomorrow." It felt like a promise and a warning all at once. Julie nodded, releasing his arm. "Tomorrow, then." She turned to go, but Peter's voice stopped her. "Julie?" She looked back. "Thank you. For staying. For not running when you had every reason to. We're married," she said simply. "For better or worse, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't think either of us could have imagined how much worse it might get. Then I guess we'll just have to make sure the better part is worth it." She left him standing there and retreated to her room, her heart pounding with residual fear and something else, something that felt dangerously close to attachment. Peter Ashford was supposed to be her contractual husband, a stranger she'd agreed to live with for 2 years. But somewhere between the scars and the secrets, between the fear in his eyes and the gentleness of his touch, he was becoming something more, something that could break her heart as easily as the enemies hunting them could break her body. Julie looked at herself in the mirror, still dressed in the crimson gown, and barely recognized the woman staring back. 3 days ago, she'd been an ordinary person with ordinary problems. Now she was tangled in a web of danger and revenge, married to a man haunted by ghosts, standing in the crosshairs of people who'd proven they would kill to get what they wanted. She should be terrified. And she was. But underneath the fear was something else. Determination, resolve, and a growing certainty that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it by hiding. Tomorrow, Peter would tell her everything. And then the real fight would begin. Julie unzipped the dress and let it fall to the floor, trading it for comfortable clothes that felt like armor of a different kind. Tomorrow would bring revelations and plans, and probably more danger than she could imagine. But tonight, she was still here, still standing, still choosing to stay. And that, she realized, was its own kind of victory. Morning came too quickly and not fast enough. Julie had spent the night in restless half-sleep, her dreams haunted by cold blue eyes and whispered threats. When she finally gave up and emerged from her room at 7, she found Peter already awake, standing at the windows with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He hadn't changed from last night, still wore the dress shirt and slacks from the gala, though he'd shed the jacket and tie. The shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing those scarred forearms she was beginning to understand told a story of survival. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the exhaustion on his face was stark in the morning light. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a hollowness to his features that spoke of a night spent wrestling demons instead of sleeping. "You didn't rest," she said quietly. "Neither did you." It wasn't a question. He could see the same weariness reflected in her own face. "Coffee? Please." They moved through the morning ritual with a strange intimacy born of shared trauma. Peter poured her coffee exactly how she'd taken it the past few days. 2 sugars, splash of cream, without asking. She found herself standing beside him at the window, both of them staring out at the city waking below, and the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was the silence of soldiers in a foxhole, gathering strength before the next battle. "I promised you the truth," Peter said finally. His voice was rough, unused. "I don't know where to start." "Start with Elena." He flinched at her name, but nodded. "Elena was my half-sister. Same father, different mothers. Our father was not a good man. He built Ashford Industries on the backs of people he destroyed. Ruthless doesn't begin to cover it." Peter's jaw tightened, old anger surfacing. "When I was 15, I found out he was involved in things that went beyond questionable business practices. Money laundering, extortion, connections to organized crime." Julie's breath caught. "Your father was a criminal?" "My father was a monster who wore expensive suits." The bitterness in Peter's voice was corrosive. When I confronted him about it, he laughed. Told me that's how empires are built. On the backs of the weak, in partnership with those willing to get their hands dirty. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, to take over the family business in all its ugliness. But you didn't. I tried to expose him instead. Peter's laugh was hollow. God, I was so naive. 17 years old and convinced that the truth would somehow fix everything. I gathered evidence, went to the authorities, and learned very quickly that my father's reach extended into places I'd never imagined. Police, prosecutors, politicians. Everyone either worked for him or was too afraid to move against him. He paused, taking a sip of his now cold coffee and grimacing. Julie waited, giving him space to find the words. The night after I tried to turn him in, there was a fire at our house. My mother was inside. His voice went flat, emotionless, the tone of someone reciting facts too painful to feel. The official report said it was an electrical fault, but I knew. It was a message. This is what happens when you betray the family. Peter. Julie's hand moved instinctively to his arm, a gesture of comfort for pain that was 6 years old and still bleeding fresh. My father died 3 months later. Heart attack, sudden, unexpected. And I inherited everything, the legitimate businesses, the dirty ones, and all the enemies he'd made along the way. Peter finally looked at her, and the anguish in his eyes was unbearable. I was 27 years old, suddenly responsible for an empire I didn't want, built on foundations I despised. But I also had a sister. Elena was 22, finishing medical school. She was the only good thing left from our family. So I made a choice. What choice? To burn it all down from the inside. His voice gained strength, purpose. I started dismantling my father's criminal operations piece by piece, cut ties with his dirty partners, went legitimate, even though it meant bleeding money and making powerful enemies. I thought if I could clean up the family name, if I could turn Ashford Industries into something honest, maybe my mother's death wouldn't have been for nothing. Julie's mind raced, connecting pieces. But someone didn't want you to succeed. Dmitry Kovac. Peter's entire body tensed at the name. He was my father's primary partner in the criminal operations. Arms dealing primarily, but also human trafficking, drugs, anything that turned a profit. When I started cutting him out, he came to me with a proposition. Keep the partnership going, maintain the status quo, or face consequences. You refused. Of course I refused. Peter's hands curled into fists. I'd watched my mother die for my father's sins. I wasn't going to perpetuate them. So I told Kovac to go to hell and doubled down on going legitimate. I hired the best lawyers, paid off my father's debts to criminal organizations, severed every connection I could find. He set down his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. 3 months later, Elena disappeared. The words hung in the air, heavy with grief and guilt. Julie watched Peter's face contort with pain, watched him struggle to maintain composure against the weight of what he was confessing. She was walking home from the hospital after a late shift. Security footage shows a van pulling up beside her. 4 men. She fought. God, she fought so hard, but they took her. His voice broke. That was 6 years ago, October 15th. I haven't seen her since. Did Kovac admit to taking her? He didn't have to. 2 days after she vanished, I received a message. Simple, direct. Resume the partnership, or she dies. No proof of life, no demands beyond that. Just an ultimatum. Julie felt sick. What did you do? I tried to find her. Spent every resource I had, hired private investigators, former intelligence agents, anyone who might have leads into Kovac's organization. I found nothing. It was like she'd vanished into smoke. Peter's voice was hollow. So I agreed to resume the partnership. Told Kovac I'd play along, maintain the criminal operations. And for 6 months, I did exactly that while secretly building a case against him. But it didn't work. It backfired spectacularly. Peter turned away from the window, pacing now, unable to stay still. Kovac knew what I was doing. He'd been testing me, watching to see if I'd truly submit. When he realized I was gathering evidence against him, he sent me a package, Elena's medical school ring, and a note that said, "She's already dead. You're just deciding how much longer you want to pretend otherwise." The cruelty of it made Julie's throat tight with rage and sorrow. You didn't believe him. I couldn't. Peter's eyes were wet, but no tears fell. Because if she was dead, if I'd gotten her killed by trying to be a hero, then everything, my mother's death, the empire I'd inherited, all of it, was for nothing. So I chose to believe she was alive, that somewhere in Kovac's network, she was being held, waiting for rescue. He stopped pacing, standing in the center of the room like a man at the end of his rope. That's when I changed tactics. I stopped trying to destroy Kovac directly. Instead, I started building something else, a network of my own. Information brokers, security specialists, people inside law enforcement who were actually clean. I used my father's empire, the legitimate parts, to create leverage, to make myself too valuable to kill outright. And the scars? Peter's hand moved unconsciously to his ribs. From when I got too close, like I told you. 2 years ago, I found a lead. A facility in Eastern Europe where Kovac's organization was holding trafficking victims. I went there myself, bypassed my own security team, thinking I could find Elena. Instead, I found a trap. They were waiting for me. His voice went distant, recounting horror. They beat me, broke 3 ribs, punctured a lung. Then they carved reminders into my back. Warnings about what happens when you cross certain lines. Marcus found me 3 days later, barely alive in a warehouse. Peter met her eyes. That's when I learned the full scope of what I was up against. Kovac doesn't just run criminal operations. He's connected to something bigger. An organization that spans countries, that has politicians and law enforcement on payroll, that operates with impunity. Julie's mind reeled. And my father's debt. That was part of this? Your father borrowed money from a subsidiary that's ultimately controlled by Kovac's organization. I don't think he knew. Most people don't. The connections are buried deep. But when I saw his file, when I realized they were positioning to seize his assets, potentially use his family as leverage, Peter's voice went soft. I saw a chance to do something right for once, to save someone before they became another casualty. So you married me. I married you because putting you under my protection, making you publicly my wife, meant Kovac couldn't touch you without declaring open war. And he's not ready for that. Not yet. Peter moved closer, and she could see every line of exhaustion, every shadow of pain etched into his features. But I also married you because I was tired of being alone in this fight. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, having someone to protect would give me a reason to be more careful, to think strategically instead of just charging forward recklessly. That's not the only reason. Julie said it with certainty, watching something flicker in his eyes. Vulnerability. Carefully hidden, but there nonetheless. No, Peter admitted quietly. It's not. When I met your father, when he brought you to that first meeting, You remember the one where we were introduced? Julie nodded. She'd barely spoken during that meeting, had sat silently while her father and Peter discussed terms in language that felt clinical and distant. You looked at me like I was a person, not a solution, Peter continued. Everyone else, they see the money, the power, the Ashford name, but you saw through it. You looked angry and trapped and defiant, and I thought... He stopped, searching for words. I thought maybe someone who could see past the armor might be worth keeping close. The confession hung between them, intimate and dangerous. Julie felt her heart racing, felt the pull of something that went beyond gratitude or shared trauma. This was attraction, complicated and inconvenient, and absolutely terrifying given their circumstances. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now we stop running. Peter's expression hardened into something determined. Last night, when Kovac approached us, he made a mistake. He revealed that he's watching actively, that he's interested in you specifically. That means he sees you as leverage, which means we can use that. Use it how? Peter moved to a desk in the corner, pulling out a laptop and several files. For 6 years, I've been gathering intelligence on Kovac's operations. I know where his money flows, who his partners are, which politicians take his bribes. What I don't have is proof solid enough to bring him down. He's too careful, too insulated. But if we can make him move against us directly, if we can provoke him into making a mistake, you want to use me as bait. Julie said it flatly, understanding dawning. No. Peter's response was immediate, fierce. I want us to create a situation where Kovac thinks you're vulnerable, while actually maintaining complete control. It's different. It sounds like semantics. It's the difference between throwing you to wolves and setting a trap with you safely out of reach. He pulled up a document on the laptop, showing her what looked like financial records. Kovac's organization moves money through a series of shell companies. One of them, Meridian Holdings, is currently being investigated by the FBI. They don't have enough evidence to move forward, but if we could provide additional proof, connect Meridian directly to Kovac. Julie studied the screen, her mind working through implications. You think he'd panic, make a move. I think he'd try to eliminate the threat, which means coming after the source of the information. Peter's eyes met hers. That would be me. But if he thinks you're the one who accessed the files, who gave them to the FBI, he comes after me instead. Julie finished. And you catch him in the act. With every law enforcement agency in the country watching, yes. Peter's voice was steady, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. But Julie, this is dangerous. More dangerous than anything we've faced so far. If something goes wrong, then we make sure nothing goes wrong. She surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. You've been fighting alone for 6 years, Peter. You've sacrificed everything trying to save your sister and stop a monster. Let me help. Let me be part of this. He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched emotions war across his face. Fear for her safety. Desperate hope that his plan might work, and something else. Something that looked like admiration. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he said softly, or the most reckless. Can I be both? She managed a small smile. You are. That startled a laugh out of him. Brief, surprised, genuine. The sound transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look younger, less burdened. Fair point. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them until they stood barely a foot apart. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the faint scent of coffee and something uniquely him, cedar and determination and exhaustion. If we do this, Peter said, his voice low and intense, you follow my lead. You trust Marcus and the security team. You don't take unnecessary risks. Understood? Understood. Julie lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. But the same goes for you. No more running off alone to raid warehouses. We're partners now. Act like it. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise giving way to respect, then to something warmer and more dangerous. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his palm cupped her cheek, the touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel against her skin. Partners. he murmured, testing the word. "I've never had one of those before." "Then we'll figure it out together." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and proximity. Julie's heart hammered against her ribs, and she was acutely aware of every place their bodies almost touched. His hand on her face, the scant inches between them, the heat radiating from him. It would be so easy to close that distance, to cross the line from partnership into something else entirely. Peter seemed to feel it too. His eyes dropped to her mouth, lingered there for a heartbeat. She saw him struggle with the impulse, saw desire war with restraint. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled back. "We should focus on the plan," he said, his voice rougher than before. "There's a lot to coordinate." Julie nodded, ignoring the flash of disappointment. He was right. This wasn't the time for complications, for attraction that could cloud judgment and get them killed. But as she watched him return to the laptop, to the files and strategies and careful planning, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen when this was over. If they survived. If they won. Would they still be partners then? Or would the contract marriage expire as planned, leaving them as strangers who'd shared trauma but nothing more? The thought bothered her more than it should have. They spent the rest of the morning planning. Peter walked her through the details of Kovac's organization, the key players, the money trails, the connections that made him untouchable. Marcus joined them at noon, bringing additional security personnel who would be essential to the operation. "We'll need FBI cooperation," Marcus said, studying Peter's proposed plan. "They'll want assurances that this isn't vigilante justice." "Leave that to me." Peter's expression was grim. "I have contacts. People who've been waiting for a chance to move against Kovac but couldn't without solid evidence. If we can give them that, they'll move." "And if Kovac moves first?" Julie asked. "If he decides we're too much of a threat before we spring the trap. Then we have contingencies." Peter pulled up another file, this one showing multiple safe houses, extraction routes, backup identities. "I've been preparing for this possibility for years. Whatever happens, you'll be protected." "We'll be protected," she corrected. "Stop acting like you're expendable." Peter's eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask cracked completely. She saw the bone-deep weariness, the guilt that had been eating him alive for 6 years, the part of him that didn't believe he deserved to survive if Elena didn't. It broke her heart. "I mean it, Peter." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You don't get to throw your life away. Not on my watch." Marcus cleared his throat, diplomatically looking away. But Julie kept her eyes on Peter, willing him to understand. They were in this together now. All the way to the end. Whatever that looked like. Finally, Peter nodded. "Together then. Together." The word felt like a vow, binding and irrevocable. They had crossed a line this morning, moved from reluctant strangers to genuine allies. And underneath that alliance, something else was growing. Something neither of them had planned for, but both were beginning to recognize. Trust, connection, and the dangerous, fragile beginning of something that looked a lot like love. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, they had a trap to set and a monster to catch. And somewhere in the darkness of Kovac's empire, Peter's sister waited. Alive or dead, they would find out. They would finish this, or die trying. 3 days of preparation felt like 3 years. Julie learned more about corporate espionage, surveillance tactics, and criminal networks than she'd ever wanted to know. Peter's apartment transformed into something resembling a war room. Laptops displaying financial data, whiteboards covered in connections and timelines, Marcus and his team coming and going at all hours. She barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were filled with cold blue eyes and the phantom echo of a woman named Elena calling for help. But through it all, Peter was there, not hovering, not treating her like fragile glass, but as a genuine partner. He explained every detail of the plan, walked her through every contingency, made sure she understood the risks and the escape routes. And in the quiet moments between strategy sessions, she caught glimpses of the man beneath the armor, the one who made terrible coffee but kept trying, who had a dry sense of humor that surfaced when he was exhausted, who looked at her sometimes like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. It was dangerous, this growing attachment. They both knew it, but neither seemed capable of stopping it. On the third night, as Marcus finalized arrangements with the FBI, Julie found Peter alone in the training room. He wasn't hitting the bags this time, just sitting on the bench, staring at his wrapped hands, lost in thought. The vulnerability of the posture made her heart ache. "Can't sleep either?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and the exhaustion on his face was stark in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Too much to think about. Want company?" He hesitated, then nodded. Julie crossed to the bench, sitting beside him with enough space between them to be proper, but close enough to feel his presence. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people learning to exist in each other's orbit. "Tomorrow, it begins," Peter said finally. "Once we leak those files to the FBI, once they start moving on Meridian Holdings, there's no going back. Kovac will know we're coming for him. Are you having second thoughts? About the plan?" "No." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "About involving you. Every single second." "Peter, let me finish." His voice was rough with emotion he was barely containing. 6 years ago, I lost everyone who mattered. My mother, Elena, even my father, though losing him felt more like relief than grief. I've been alone in this fight for so long that I forgot what it felt like to have someone standing beside me. And now that I have it, now that I have you, I'm terrified of losing it. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Julie felt her throat tighten with emotions she didn't have names for. "You're not going to lose me," she said, and was surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "I'm not going anywhere, Peter. Not until this is finished. And after?" The question was barely audible. "After it's finished? After the 2 years are up and the contract expires? What then?" Julie's heart stuttered. She hadn't let herself think that far ahead, hadn't dared to imagine a future beyond surviving the present. But now, looking at Peter's face, at the fear and hope warring in his expression, she realized she wanted there to be an after, wanted it desperately. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I want to find out." Something shifted in Peter's eyes. Relief, wonder, something that looked dangerously close to joy. His hand moved toward her face, that gesture she was beginning to recognize. But this time when he touched her, it was different. Not performance, not comfort, but something else entirely. His thumb traced her cheekbone with aching tenderness, and she saw him struggle with the impulse to close the distance between them. "Julie," he breathed, and her name in his mouth was a prayer and a plea. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "I know this is complicated. I know we're in the middle of something dangerous, and the timing is terrible and we barely know each other. But Peter, I feel it too." His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like she was precious, breakable. "God help me, I feel it too." The space between them evaporated. Peter's forehead rested against hers, and Julie could feel his breath on her lips, could see the conflict in his eyes, desire warring with restraint, with the fear that caring for her would get her killed. "We can't," he whispered, even as his grip on her tightened. "Not now. Not while you're in danger because of me. Then when? When it's over. When Kovac is in prison and you're safe, and you've had time to think clearly without fear clouding your judgment." His voice was anguished. "I need you to choose this. Choose me, when you're free to walk away. Not when you're trapped in a contract and I'm all you have." The logic was sound. Painfully so. But it didn't stop the ache in her chest, the wanting that had grown from curiosity to something much more dangerous. "Okay," she agreed softly. "When it's over." Peter pulled back slowly, the loss of contact almost physical. But his eyes held a promise, a commitment that tomorrow, after they survived, after they won, they would revisit this moment. And next time, neither of them would pull away. The leak went live at 8 a.m. Peter had arranged it through a journalist with a reputation for exposing corporate corruption, a woman who'd been investigating Kovac for years without enough evidence to publish. Now she had a treasure trove, financial records linking Meridian Holdings directly to arms deals, money laundering, and a dozen other crimes. Within an hour, every major news outlet was running the story. By noon, FBI agents were raiding Meridian's offices, and in his penthouse across the city, Dmitry Kovac was watching it all unfold. Marcus had managed to plant surveillance in Kovac's building months ago, a risky operation that had nearly cost two of his best operatives their lives. Now it paid off. They watched on monitors as Kovac made call after call, his usual composure cracking under the pressure of federal investigation and media scrutiny. "He's panicking," Marcus observed, watching Kovac's body language on the grainy footage. "Look at the way he's moving. This is someone who's losing control." Peter's eyes never left the screen. How long before he makes a move? Hours, maybe. He'll need to identify the leak source first. Marcus pulled up another window showing phone intercepts. His people are already digging. Once they trace it back to you, they'll come for Julie. Peter's jaw tightened. That's what we're counting on. Julie watched from her position near the window, her heart hammering despite the calm facade she tried to maintain. This was the plan. Let Kovac discover that the leak came from access to Peter's files that only someone close to him could have obtained. Let him think Julie was the weak link, the betrayer, the one who could be isolated and eliminated. What Kovac didn't know was that every move he made was being monitored, that the FBI had agents positioned around the building, that Marcus's team had transformed the penthouse into a fortress with enough surveillance and security to catch Kovac's people in the act of attempted murder, a crime that would finally put him away for good. "Contact," one of Marcus's operatives said suddenly, pointing at a monitor. 3 vehicles, approaching from the south. Occupants match known Kovac associates. Peter was instantly alert, moving to Julie's side. "They're moving faster than expected. Should we abort?" Marcus asked, his hand already reaching for his radio to signal the FBI. "No." Julie surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "We stick to the plan." Peter looked at her, conflict clear in his expression. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks, struggling between strategic necessity and the overwhelming urge to protect her. "Trust the plan," she said quietly, echoing his own words from days ago. "Trust your team. Trust me." After an agonizing pause, Peter nodded. "Positions everyone. This happens exactly as we planned." The next 20 minutes were choreographed chaos. Marcus's team melted into positions throughout the building, invisible but present. FBI agents in unmarked cars took up surveillance positions on the street, and Julie allowed herself to be positioned exactly where she needed to be, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, alone and apparently vulnerable. The bait in the trap. Peter hated it. She could see it in every line of his body as he retreated to the hidden panic room that had been installed days ago, close enough to reach her in seconds if needed, far enough to sell the illusion that she was unprotected. His eyes met hers one last time before the door closed, and the anguish there nearly broke her resolve. "I've got you," Marcus's voice said, through the nearly invisible earpiece she wore. "You're not alone, Mrs. Ashford. Just breathe and stick to the script." Julie nodded, even though no one could see her. She moved to the desk, pulled out her laptop, and began the performance they'd rehearsed, typing furiously, as if working on something urgent, checking her phone nervously, looking toward the door with faked anxiety. Every gesture designed to paint a picture. Guilty wife, realizing what she'd done, afraid of consequences. The elevator dinged. Julie's heart lurched into her throat, but she forced herself to stay in character. Kept typing. Pretended not to hear the footsteps approaching down the hallway. The front door opened. Not crashed through, but opened with a key that shouldn't exist. Kovac's people had gotten past building security, had somehow obtained access. The realization that they could reach her this easily, contract or not, sent real fear coursing through her veins. 3 men entered the penthouse. 2 were muscle, large, brutal-looking, with the dead eyes of people who'd killed before. But the third was smaller, sharper, with an intelligence in his gaze that was somehow more frightening than the thug's violence. "Mrs. Ashford," the intelligent one said, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe. "We need to have a conversation about your recent activities. Julie stood slowly, letting her laptop fall closed. I don't know what you're talking about. No? Then perhaps you can explain how files from your husband's private server ended up in the hands of the FBI? He moved closer, his smile cold and calculating. Mr. Kovac is very disappointed. He had such hopes for your marriage. I didn't. Julie let her voice shake, playing the terrified amateur. I don't have access to Peter's files. Lying won't help you. The man gestured to the thugs, who moved to flank her, cutting off escape routes. You have two choices. Come with us quietly and answer Mr. Kovac's questions. Or resist, and we take you by force. Either way, you're leaving this apartment. This was the critical moment. In the original plan, this was when the FBI would swoop in, when Marcus's team would emerge from hiding. But something felt wrong. Julie could sense it. A hesitation in her earpiece, a tension in the air. Abort signal, Marcus's voice said urgently in her ear. FBI team is blocked. Accident on the street. Response delayed. Peter, we need to... But Julie didn't hear the rest because one of the thugs lunged, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Instinct and adrenaline took over. She remembered the self-defense training Peter had insisted on over the past 3 days, the moves Marcus had drilled until they were muscle memory. She twisted, using the thug's momentum against him, and her elbow connected with his solar plexus. He grunted, releasing her, and she was moving. Not toward the door, but toward the panic room, toward Peter. She almost made it. The second thug caught her halfway across the room, his arm wrapping around her waist and lifting her off her feet. Julie screamed, not in character but in genuine terror, and fought with everything she had. Her elbow caught someone's face. Her heel connected with a kneecap. But there were 3 of them, and one of her. And training only went so far against size and experience. The panic room door exploded outward. Peter emerged like a force of nature, all controlled violence and terrifying focus. He moved with a precision that spoke of training far beyond corporate executive, every strike calculated and devastating. The thug holding Julie released her to face this new threat, and she stumbled backward, watching in shocked awe as Peter dismantled Kovac's men with brutal efficiency. It was over in less than 30 seconds. All 3 men were on the ground, not dead, but incapacitated, groaning in pain. And Peter stood over them, chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding, looking like some avenging angel carved from rage and desperation. His eyes found Julie across the room. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Peter crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands running over her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the violence of moments before. I'm okay, she managed. Peter, I'm okay. Marcus and his team flooded into the apartment, weapons drawn, securing the 3 groaning men. FBI is 2 minutes out, he reported. We got everything on camera. Attempted kidnapping, breaking and entering, assault. Plus, whatever they confess when the feds start questioning. Peter barely seemed to hear him. His focus was entirely on Julie, his hand still gentle on her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. I shouldn't have put you in that position. When they grabbed you, when I couldn't get to you fast enough. But you did get to me. Julie covered his hands with hers. I'm safe. We're safe. And they fell right into the trap. At what cost? His voice was raw. You could have been taken, hurt, killed, and it would have been my fault for thinking I could control every variable, for believing I could keep you safe while using you as bait. Peter, look at me. She waited until his eyes focused on hers. I chose this. I knew the risks, and I'd make the same choice again because this isn't just about catching Kovac anymore. It's about saving your sister. About stopping him from hurting anyone else. That's worth the risk. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The FBI was nearly there, ready to take Kovac's men into custody, to follow the chain of evidence back to the man himself. Everything they'd planned was coming together. But in that moment, standing in the wreckage of their apartment with Peter's bloody hands cradling her face and his eyes full of emotions he couldn't voice, Julie realized the trap they'd set had caught more than just criminals. It had caught them. bound them together in ways that went far beyond contracts and convenience. "When this is over," Peter said, his voice barely above a whisper, "when Kovac is behind bars and you're truly safe, ask me again about the after. Ask me what happens when the 2 years are up. And what will you say?" His thumb traced her lower lip, a touch so gentle it made her shiver. "I'll say that I don't want you to leave. That somewhere between marriage contracts and corporate espionage, I fell for my own wife. And I'll ask if there's any chance she might feel the same." Julie's breath caught. This wasn't the plan. They'd agreed to wait, to avoid complications. But standing here, with danger behind them, and more danger still ahead, pretending seemed pointless. "She does," Julie whispered. "She absolutely does." The words hung between them, a confession and a promise. Peter's forehead dropped to rest against hers, and she felt the shuddering breath he released. Relief and wonder, and something that felt like coming home. The apartment filled with FBI agents, with Marcus giving reports, with the controlled chaos of law enforcement securing a scene. But for just a moment, Peter and Julie stood in the eye of the storm, holding on to each other, acknowledging the truth they'd both been avoiding. This marriage had stopped being fake the moment they'd started being honest. And whatever happened next, whether they found Elena, whether Kovac fell, whether the danger ever truly ended, they would face it together. Not because a contract required it, but because they chose it. The interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Julie watched through the one-way glass as FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen circled the intelligent one, the man who'd tried to take her. His name was Viktor Petrov, and according to the initial background check, he'd been Kovac's right hand for over a decade. If anyone knew where Elena was, it would be him. Peter stood beside her, so close their shoulders touched. He hadn't left her side since the FBI had arrived, as if afraid that letting her out of his sight might make her disappear. His hand found hers in the darkness of the observation room, fingers lacing together with a desperate intensity that had nothing to do with the interrogation they were watching. "He's not going to talk," Peter said, his voice tight with frustration. "Kovac's people are loyal. They know what happens to those who betray him." "Chen is good," Marcus countered from his position near the door. "She's broken harder cases than this." On the other side of the glass, Chen leaned against the table, her posture deceptively casual. "Here's what I don't understand, Victor. You're looking at 20 years minimum for attempted kidnapping. Add in the weapons charges, the breaking and entering, assaulting Mrs. Ashford. We're talking 30 to life. And for what? Loyalty to a man who'll cut you loose the second it's convenient?" Victor's expression didn't change. "I want my lawyer. You can have your lawyer. But before they get here, let me show you something." Chen pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. "This is a spreadsheet we recovered from Meridian Holdings. See that column? Those are payments made to offshore accounts. And look, there's your name. Except the payments stopped 6 months ago." For the first time, something flickered across Victor's face. Surprise, followed quickly by suspicion. "Kovac has been stealing from you," Chen continued, her voice sympathetic. "From all of you. While you risk your life for him, he's been siphoning money that should have been your cut. How does that make you feel, Victor? Still loyal?" Peter's hand tightened on Julie's. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the desperate hope that this might work, that they might finally get answers. "I have nothing to say," Victor said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Chen nodded as if expecting this. "Fair enough, but let me tell you what happens next. We're raiding Kovac's properties as we speak. His offices, his residences, his warehouses. And when we find what we're looking for, when we locate the trafficking victims, the evidence of his other crimes, whoever cooperates first gets the deal. The rest? They go down with the ship." She stood, moving toward the door. "Think about it, Victor. Think about whether Dmitry Kovac is worth spending the rest of your life in prison. Your lawyer should be here in an hour. Make your decision by then." Chen exited the interrogation room, joining them in the observation area moments later. She looked exhausted, her suit rumpled, but her eyes were sharp. "He's wavering. Give him time alone to think. Let the paranoia work on him. If Kovac really has been skimming from his own people, That's leverage we can use. What about the raids? Peter asked. Have you found anything? Chen's expression darkened. We hit 3 properties simultaneously. The office was clean. Too clean. Like they knew we were coming and sanitized everything. But one of the warehouses... She paused, choosing her words carefully. We found holding cells. Empty now, but recently used. There's evidence of multiple people being kept there. DNA samples are being processed. Julie felt Peter go rigid beside her. Elena, he breathed. Could she have been there? We don't know yet. The DNA processing takes time. But Peter... Chen's voice softened with something like pity. Even if she was there, she's not anymore. Kovac would have moved her the moment he knew we were coming. The devastation on Peter's face was unbearable. Julie turned to him, her free hand coming up to his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. We're getting closer, she said firmly. This is the closest you've been in 6 years. Don't give up now. His eyes met hers, and she saw the war raging behind them. Hope and despair, determination and exhaustion. What if we're too late? What if all this time I've been chasing a ghost? Then we find out the truth, Julie said. Whatever it is. But we don't stop until we know. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked up sharply. We have a problem. Kovac just left his penthouse. He's on the move. Chen was immediately alert. Where? Unknown. He got into a car with diplomatic plates. Russian embassy. Our surveillance can't follow without causing an international incident. Peter's face went pale. He's running. He knows we're coming for him, and he's running. Or he's consolidating, Chen countered. Moving assets, destroying evidence, tying up loose ends. She met Peter's eyes, and her expression was grim. Loose ends might include your sister, if she's still alive. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Peter pulled away from Julie, began pacing the small observation room like a caged animal. We need to find him. Now. Before he what? Chen's voice was sharp. Peter, you're a civilian. You've already pushed the boundaries of what I can allow by being here during the interrogation. I can't let you go after Kovac yourself. Then what do you suggest? We sit here while he destroys evidence and kills anyone who can testify against him? I suggest you let us do our job. Chen's tone brooked no argument. We have teams tracking his known associates, monitoring his properties. If he makes contact with anyone, we'll know. That's not good enough. It's going to have to be. Chen moved toward the door. I need to coordinate with the other teams. Marcus, keep him here. Don't let him do anything stupid. She left, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Julie watched Peter struggle with the helplessness, with the knowledge that after all their planning, all their risks, Kovac might still slip away. There's another option, Marcus said quietly. He was looking at his phone, his expression troubled. I have a contact, someone who's been watching Kovac's organization for years. Not law enforcement, something else. He might know where Kovac would run. Peter stopped pacing. Who? Better you don't know the details. But, if you want me to make the call... Marcus left the offer hanging. It was a line being offered, Julie realized. A chance to step outside the law, to use methods the FBI couldn't. Peter had spent 6 years building resources, creating networks outside official channels. This was what he'd been preparing for. Do it, Peter said. Peter, wait. Julie moved to him, catching his arm. Think about what you're saying. If you go after Kovac outside the law, you're risking everything. The evidence we've gathered, the case the FBI is building, all of it could be compromised. I don't care about the case. His voice was raw, stripped of pretense. I care about finding my sister before Kovac disappears, and I lose my last chance to bring her home. And if she's already gone? If you throw away your life chasing someone who's been dead for years? The cruelty of the question made Peter flinch. But Julie didn't back down. Someone had to say it, had to make him see reason. Then at least I'll know, he said quietly. At least I won't spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have saved her and chose safety instead. Julie saw the resolve in his eyes and knew she'd lost the argument. Peter was going to do this, with or without her approval. The only question was whether she'd let him do it alone. "Fine," she said. "But I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. You don't get to protect me anymore, Peter. We're partners, remember? You don't go into danger without me." "Julie, this isn't like the trap we set here. This is real field work, potentially violent, definitely illegal. I won't risk you." "You don't have a choice." She squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze with determination. "Either we do this together, or I call Agent Chen right now and tell her what you're planning." Peter stared at her, conflict warring across his features. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh. "She's got you there, boss." After a long, tense moment, Peter's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine. But you follow every instruction I give. No questions. Understood?" "Understood." Marcus made the call. 40 minutes later, they were in an unmarked car heading toward the industrial district on the outskirts of the city. Marcus drove while Peter sat in the passenger seat, checking weapons with practiced efficiency that made Julie's stomach clench. She'd never seen guns outside of movies, and watching Peter load magazines, check safeties, move with the competence of someone trained for combat, it drove home just how dangerous this had become. "Your contact better be reliable," Peter said, his voice tight. "Alexei's never been wrong before." Marcus navigated through darkening streets, the neighborhoods getting progressively worse. If he says Kovac is moving assets to the old textile factory on Riverside, that's where he'll be. And Elena? He didn't say. But if Kovac's consolidating, if he's preparing to run, he'd bring anything valuable with him. Leverage, insurance. "His prisoners," Julie finished softly. They pulled up 3 blocks from the factory, parking in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse. The area was desolate, the kind of place where screams wouldn't be heard, and bodies could disappear. Julie's hands were shaking, adrenaline and fear making her heart race. Peter turned to face her, his expression serious. "Last chance to back out. Stay here with the car. Let Marcus and me handle this." "Not a chance." Something that might have been pride flickered across his face. He reached out, cupping her cheek with his palm, that gesture she'd come to crave. "When this is over, when we're safe, we're going to have a serious conversation about your self-preservation instincts. Looking forward to it." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a touch so tender it made her heart ache. Then he pulled back, all business again. "Marcus takes point. I'm behind him. Julie, you stay between us. If shooting starts, I get down and stay down. I know." They exited the car into the cold night air. The factory loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of broken windows and rusted metal. Lights flickered in some of the upper windows, signs of occupation in a building that should have been abandoned. Marcus led them through shadows, moving with the silent precision of someone who'd done this before. They reached a side entrance, the door hanging slightly ajar. Through the gap, Julie could hear voices, low, urgent, speaking in Russian. Peter's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Then Marcus was moving, slipping through the door, and they followed into the belly of the beast. The interior of the factory was a maze of old machinery and support pillars, shadows deep enough to hide in. They moved slowly, carefully, following the sound of voices toward what had once been the main production floor. And then they saw it. The space had been converted into a makeshift operations center. Computers on folding tables, boxes being loaded into trucks, men moving with urgent efficiency. And in the center of it all, directing operations with cold precision, was Dmitry Kovac. Julie felt Peter go rigid beside her. 6 years of rage and grief coalescing into a single moment of reckoning. His hand moved toward the gun at his waist, but Marcus caught his arm, shaking his head. Too many guards. Too exposed. This had to be smart, not emotional. But then one of the guards moved, and behind him, Julie saw something that made her blood freeze. A cage. And inside it, a woman. She was thin. Too thin, with matted dark hair, and eyes that held the kind of haunted emptiness that came from prolonged trauma. But even from a distance, even in the dim light, the resemblance to Peter was unmistakable. Elena. She was alive. Peter saw her at the same moment Julie did. She felt the shock run through him like an electric current. felt the precise second when his control shattered completely. He moved before Marcus could stop him, stepping out of the shadows with his gun raised. "Kovac!" The word echoed through the factory, bringing all activity to a halt. Every head turned toward them. Every gun came up. Julie's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were hopelessly outnumbered, exposed, about to die in this abandoned factory. But Peter only had eyes for his sister. "Elena," he called, his voice breaking on her name. "I'm here. I'm going to get you out." The woman in the cage lifted her head slowly, as if the movement cost her everything. Her eyes found Peter across the distance, and Julie saw recognition flicker, dim, confused, but there. After 6 years of captivity, Elena Ashford recognized her brother. Kovac smiled, a serpent's expression that held no warmth. "Peter, how predictable. I knew eventually you'd be foolish enough to come yourself. Let her go." Peter's gun never wavered, aimed directly at Kovac's chest. "This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with our business. On the contrary, she has everything to do with it. She's been my insurance policy for 6 years, the thing keeping you from destroying me completely." Kovac moved closer to the cage, his hand resting almost affectionately on the bars. "Did you really think I'd give that up just because the FBI is investigating? You're finished, Kovac. The FBI has your files. Your people are talking. Your empire is crumbling. Let Elena go, and maybe you walk away from this alive." "Such bravado from a man who's surrounded by my men." Kovac gestured, and Julie heard the distinctive sound of weapons being cocked. At least a dozen guards, all armed, all aimed at them. "You've made a terrible mistake coming here, Peter. But I'll give you one chance. Walk away now. Leave your sister. Leave your wife. Yes, I know she's here with you. And I'll let you live. Never. Then you'll die. And I'll keep Elena. Keep your wife. They'll replace the leverage I'm losing from my other operations." Kovac's eyes found Julie, and the cold calculation there made her skin crawl. Such a beautiful woman. It would be a shame to waste her. The threat was clear, visceral. Julie felt Peter's entire body go rigid with rage, saw his finger tighten on the trigger. This was it. The moment where everything exploded into violence and chaos. But before anyone could fire, a new voice cut through the tension. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The factory's main doors burst open, and suddenly the space was flooded with federal agents, tactical gear, assault rifles. Agent Chen led the charge, her weapon trained on Kovac with deadly precision. "Dmitry Kovac, you're under arrest. Order your men to stand down or we will open fire." For a moment, the tableau held, Peter and Kovac locked in a stare, guns everywhere, Elena in her cage watching with those haunted eyes. Julie could barely breathe, waiting for someone to make the wrong move and turn this into a bloodbath. Then, slowly, Kovac smiled. "It seems we're at an impasse." "No," Chen said coldly. "We're at an ending. Your choice is whether it ends with arrests or body bags." The silence stretched impossibly long. Then Kovac raised his hands, the picture of cooperation. "Stand down," he told his men. "Let's not make this messier than it needs to be." One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. FBI agents swarmed forward, cuffing them with practiced efficiency. But Julie's eyes were on Peter, who had lowered his gun and was moving toward the cage, toward his sister. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking. "Elena, it's me. It's Peter. You're safe now. You're safe." The woman in the cage stared at him with those empty eyes, and Julie's heart broke at the devastation on Peter's face. 6 years of hoping, of searching, of refusing to give up. And now, facing the reality of what those years had cost his sister. Marcus appeared with bolt cutters, breaking the lock. The cage door swung open. Peter reached for Elena, slowly, giving her time to recognize him, to understand. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry it took me so long. But I'm here now. I'm going to take you home." Elena's hand lifted, trembling, and touched his face. "Peter?" Her voice was hoarse from disuse, uncertain. "Is it really you?" "It's me. I promise. It's really me. and then she collapsed into his arms. 6 years of trauma breaking in a single sob. Peter held her like she might disappear, his own shoulders shaking with the force of his grief and relief. Julie watched through her own tears as brother and sister were finally reunited. Across the factory, Kovac was being led away in handcuffs, still smiling that serpent smile. "This isn't over, Peter," he called. "You think you've won, but this organization is bigger than me. Someone else will come. They always do." "Let them," Peter said, not looking up from his sister. "I'll be waiting." Chen approached them, her expression gentle. "We need to get her to a hospital. Get her checked out, start the recovery process." Peter nodded, carefully helping Elena to her feet. She was unsteady, weak from captivity, and he supported her weight like she weighed nothing. Marcus moved to help, and together they guided her toward the exit, toward freedom, toward whatever came next. Julie followed, her heart full and breaking simultaneously. They'd won. They'd found Elena, caught Kovac, survived. But looking at the haunted woman being carried from her prison, Julie understood that winning looked different than she'd imagined. Victory was messy and painful, and came with scars that might never fully heal. Outside, ambulances waited. Paramedics rushed forward, but Elena wouldn't let go of Peter's hand, her fingers clutching his with desperate strength. "Don't leave," she whispered. "Please don't leave me again." "Never." Peter's voice was fierce, absolute. "I swear to you, Elena, I will never leave you again." They loaded her into the ambulance, and Peter climbed in beside her. He looked back at Julie, standing alone in the chaos, and the expression on his face was torn between relief and anguish. "Go," Julie said, understanding without words. "She needs you. I'll meet you at the hospital." He mouthed, "Thank you," and then the doors closed, the ambulance pulling away with lights flashing. Julie stood in the cold night air, watching it disappear, and felt the weight of everything settle over her. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd actually done it. But the fight, she suspected, was far from over. Recovery would be long. Justice would be complicated. And the growing connection between her and Peter, that would have to navigate the reality of trauma and healing, and a sister who would need all of his attention for months, maybe years to come. Marcus appeared at her elbow, looking as exhausted as she felt. "Hell of a night." "Yeah," Julie agreed. "Hell of a night." They stood together in silence, two people who'd helped orchestrate a miracle, and were now facing the messy reality of its aftermath. Tomorrow would bring questions, statements to the FBI, media attention. Tomorrow would bring the start of Elena's long road to recovery. Tomorrow would bring decisions about futures and marriages, and whether what had grown between Julie and Peter could survive beyond the crisis that created it. But tonight, they'd won. And for now, that was enough. 3 months later. Julie stood at the window of the penthouse, their penthouse, though she still sometimes caught herself thinking of it as Peter's, and watched spring slowly transform the city. The trees below were budding, tiny explosions of green against gray concrete. Life returning after a long winter. So much had changed in 3 months, and yet, in some ways, everything felt suspended in amber. Elena was alive. That miracle still took Julie's breath away when she allowed herself to think about it. But alive didn't mean recovered. The woman they'd rescued from that cage bore physical resemblance to the vibrant 22-year-old in Peter's photographs. But 6 years of captivity had left scars that went deeper than skin. The first month had been the hardest. Elena had been hospitalized, her body ravaged by malnutrition and neglect, her mind fractured by trauma. Peter had barely left her side, sleeping in hospital chairs, holding her hand through nightmares, talking to her for hours about memories she sometimes recognized and sometimes didn't. Julie had visited when she could, bringing books and flowers and quiet company, but she knew her place was peripheral. This was Peter and Elena's time to reconnect, to rebuild a relationship that had been violently severed. Julie had moved through those weeks in a strange fog, attending FBI debriefings, giving statements, watching the media circus surrounding Kovac's arrest from a careful distance. The marriage contract that had brought her into Peter's life remained in effect. 18 months still to go. but they existed in a holding pattern, their growing connection frozen at the moment when the ambulance doors had closed. They hadn't finished their conversation, hadn't explored the feelings that had sparked between them during the investigation. Peter was consumed with Elena's care, and Julie refused to add pressure to an already impossible situation. But God, she missed him. Not just his presence. He came home most nights, exhausted and hollowed out by the weight of his sister's suffering. But the connection they'd begun to build, the partnership, the understanding, the way he'd looked at her in the training room and promised an after that seemed increasingly distant. "You're thinking too loud." Julie turned to find Elena standing in the doorway of the guest room she'd been staying in since her release from the hospital 2 weeks ago. She looked better than she had, the hollows in her cheeks less pronounced, color returning to her skin. But her eyes still held that haunted quality, the shadow of 6 years that might never fully lift. "Sorry," Julie said, managing a smile. "Didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't." Elena moved into the living room with careful steps, as if still learning to trust that the space was safe, that she was really free. Peter called. He's going to be late, meeting with the prosecutors about Kovach's trial. The trial. It loomed in their future, a necessary reckoning that would require Elena to testify, to relive trauma in a courtroom. Peter was trying to prepare her for it, but they all knew it would be devastating. "How are you feeling about it?" Julie asked gently. Elena was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the sofa. Terrified, but also ready, I think. I want him to pay for what he did. Not just to me, but to all the others. Her voice dropped. There were others, you know. In that place. Before me. After me. I heard them sometimes through the walls. Crying. Screaming. Julie's throat tightened with rage and sorrow. "I'm so sorry." Peter blames himself. Elena looked up, and her gaze was sharper than it had been, more present. "He thinks he should have found me sooner. That if he'd just been smarter, faster, better, I wouldn't have suffered. That's not... I know it's not his fault. I've told him 1,000 times. But he carries guilt like other people carry wallets. It's just part of him now." Elena moved to sit beside Julie, a gesture of trust that felt significant. "He talks about you, you know, when he sits with me at night and thinks I'm sleeping." Julie's heart stuttered. "What does he say? That you saved him? That marrying you was supposed to be a tactical move, a way to protect you and gain leverage against Kovach. But somewhere in the middle of it all, you became the thing that kept him going." Elena's smile was sad, knowing. "He loves you. He's just too afraid to tell you because he thinks he doesn't deserve happiness while I'm still broken." The confession hung in the air, overwhelming in its honesty. Julie felt tears prick her eyes. "You're not broken, Elena. Maybe not. But I'm not fixed either. And I won't be for a long time. Years, probably. Therapy, recovery, learning to be a person again instead of..." She trailed off, the words too painful to voice. "You don't have to do it alone," Julie said softly. "You have Peter. And if you'll let me, you have me too." Elena studied her for a long moment, something like wonder crossing her features. "You really mean that? You'd stay even though the danger is over? Even though the contract marriage served its purpose?" "The contract was never the point," Julie said, and realized as she spoke that it was absolutely true. Maybe it was in the beginning. But now... She looked at Elena, at this woman who'd survived the unimaginable, and felt a fierce protective love that had nothing to do with Peter. "Now you're family, both of you. And I don't abandon family." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I can see why he loves you." Before Julie could respond, the front door opened. Peter entered, looking exhausted and wind-worn, his suit rumpled from a long day. He stopped when he saw them together on the sofa, surprise flickering across his face. "Did I miss something?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "Just girl talk," Elena said, standing. She crossed to her brother and hugged him, a gesture that still seemed to surprise him every time, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real and here and safe. "I'm going to read for a bit. Leave you two alone." She disappeared into her room, and Peter turned to Julie with questions in his eyes. What was that about? Just talking, Julie said, her heart hammering. How did the meeting go? Long. Complicated. The prosecutors are confident, but he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. They want Elena to testify, not just about her own captivity, but about what she witnessed. The other victims, the organization's operations. It's going to be brutal. She knows. She's ready to do it anyway. Peter's expression crumbled slightly, pride and grief warring on his features. She's so much stronger than I am. That's not true, isn't it? He moved to the window, staring out at the city with hollow eyes. She endured 6 years of hell and still has the courage to face her captor in court. Meanwhile, I can barely make it through a day without feeling like I'm drowning in guilt. Julie stood, crossing to him. Peter, you didn't put her in that cage. Kovac did. You spent 6 years searching for her, refusing to give up, building the case that finally brought him down. That's not weakness. That's love. He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes was devastating. I promised you an after. I promised we'd talk, that we'd figure out what this is between us. But I can't. I don't have anything to give you right now, Julie. Everything I have is going to Elena's recovery, to making sure she has what she needs to heal. I know, Julie said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. And I'm not asking you to choose between us, Peter. I would never ask that. But you deserve more than living in limbo. The contract expires in 18 months. You should be thinking about your future, about what you want beyond this arrangement. What if what I want is this? The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest. What if I want to stay, not because of a contract, but because somewhere between corporate espionage and rescue missions, I fell in love with my fake husband? Peter went very still, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Julie, you don't have to say anything, she continued quickly. I know the timing is terrible. I know you're focused on Elena, and you should be. But you once asked me to wait until we were free to choose, until the danger was over and we could think clearly. Well, the danger is over, and I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Both of you. You don't know what you're signing up for. His voice was rough with emotion. Elena's recovery is going to be long and difficult. There will be setbacks, relapses, moments where the trauma overwhelms her. I can't promise you romance or normalcy or any of the things you deserve. I don't need romance, Julie said, stepping closer. I need honesty, partnership, the kind of connection we built while we were planning to take down Kovac. That's what I'm asking for, Peter. Not perfection, just truth. He stared at her, and she watched the war raging behind his eyes, the guilt telling him he didn't deserve happiness, the love he felt for her battling against the belief that caring for her was selfish when his sister needed him. She could see the moment the dam broke, the second when all that careful control finally shattered. Peter's hands came up to frame her face, holding her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not, she agreed, a watery smile tugging at her lips. But you're stuck with me anyway. And then he was kissing her. Not the chaste press of lips from their wedding, not performance or pretense. This was real, desperate and tender, and 6 months of denied feeling pouring into a single moment. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that spoke of loneliness finally ending, of finding home in the most unexpected place. Julie's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, drowning in the taste of him, coffee and mint, and something uniquely Peter. Time seemed to suspend, the world narrowing to just this, the warmth of his hands on her face, the press of his lips against hers, the thundering of her heart against her ribs. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Peter rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said, the words a confession and a surrender. I've been trying not to, trying to maintain distance and protect you from the mess that is my life. But Julie, I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, she whispered, her hands moving up to cup his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. Because I love you too, and I'm not going anywhere. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest, and Julie felt the shudder that ran through him. Relief and wonder, and the release of 3 months of holding everything in. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other. Two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances, and somehow, impossibly, built something real. "What happens now?" Peter asked against her hair. "Now we figure it out," Julie said. "We help Elena heal. We get through the trial. We learn how to be a real couple instead of a contractual one. And we do it all together. The contract can be dissolved, or we can let it run its course and then renew it with actual vows that mean something. I don't care about the legalities, Peter. I care about us." He pulled back enough to look at her, and the expression on his face was wonder, mixed with something that looked like hope. "You really want this? The complicated, messy, probably going to be difficult reality of being with me? More than I've wanted anything in my life. Then we'll make it work." He said it like a vow, like a promise. "However long it takes, whatever we have to go through, we'll make it work." Julie rose on her toes and kissed him again. Softer this time, but no less meaningful. This was a beginning, she realized. The real beginning of their story. After all the danger and drama had stripped away everything but the essential truth. They loved each other. And love, messy and complicated as it was worth fighting for. 6 months later, Julie stood in a courtroom and watched Peter hold his sister's hand as she testified against Dmitry Kovac. Elena's voice shook, but it never broke, as she recounted 6 years of captivity with a courage that left the jury in tears. Kovac sat at the defense table, his cold blue eyes showing no remorse, no emotion. But when the guilty verdict came down, unanimous on all counts, Julie saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, exactly, but the beginning of understanding that his empire had finally, truly fallen. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Life in prison without possibility of parole. Multiple life sentences, actually, for the murders and trafficking and countless other crimes. He would die behind bars, and the organization he'd built would be dismantled piece by piece. Peter and Elena were there for the sentencing. So was Julie, sitting in the gallery beside Marcus, watching justice finally be served. When it was over, when Kovac was led away in chains and the courtroom began to empty, Elena turned to her brother with tears streaming down her face. "It's really over," she whispered. "After all these years, it's really over." Peter pulled her into his arms, and Julie saw 6 years of pain and guilt finally begin to release. Not disappearing. Trauma didn't work that way, but loosening its grip enough to let healing begin. They walked out of the courthouse together, all 3 of them, into bright sunlight that felt like a benediction. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Marcus's security team kept them at bay as they made their way to the car. That evening, back at the penthouse, Elena announced that she was ready to get her own place. "Not far," she said quickly, seeing Peter's immediate protest. "Maybe in this building, a few floors down. But I need to start learning how to be independent again. How to be just Elena, not the rescued victim, or Peter's traumatized sister." Peter struggled with it. Julie could see the fear in his eyes, the instinct to protect warring with the understanding that Elena needed this. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but you call every day, and dinners twice a week, non-negotiable." Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time since her rescue. "Deal." The night Elena moved into her new apartment, just 4 floors down, close enough for comfort, but far enough for independence, Peter and Julie found themselves alone in the penthouse for the first time in months. They stood on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life, and Julie felt the weight of possibility settling over them. This was it. The after they'd promised each other. No more danger, no more investigations, no more crisis demanding their attention. Just them. "The contract expires in 3 weeks, Peter said quietly. "I've been thinking about what happens then." Julie's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "Oh? I could have my lawyers draft a new one. More equitable terms, actual marriage provisions instead of business arrangements." He turned to face her, and the love in his eyes still had the power to steal her breath. Or we could tear up the contract entirely and just be together. No legal obligations, no timelines. Just two people choosing each other every day. What do you want? Julie asked. Peter's hand found hers, fingers lacing together. I want to marry you again. For real this time. Not because we're trapped, or because I'm trying to protect you from criminals, but because I love you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Tears blurred Julie's vision. That sounds perfect. Yeah? His smile was tentative, hopeful. Because I should warn you, life with me is never going to be simple. There's the company to run, and Elena will always be part of our lives. And I have a tendency to work too much and forget to communicate when I'm stressed. And I'm stubborn, and I'll probably push when you want space. And I have my own career to figure out now that I'm not just playing the role of trophy wife, Julie countered. We're both going to mess this up sometimes. Probably, Peter agreed, but we'll mess it up together. Julie laughed through her tears. Is this your idea of a romantic proposal? God, no. Peter pulled back, and before Julie could ask what he was doing, he was down on one knee. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the city lights. A simple band with a single stone that was somehow more beautiful than the ostentatious wedding set he'd given her for their contract marriage. Julie, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. Will you marry me? Not because of contracts or obligations, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Because you saved me when I'd given up on being saved. Because you're my partner, my best friend, the person I want beside me for every messy, complicated, beautiful moment of the rest of my life. She was crying openly now, not even trying to stop the tears. Yes. God, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, of course. And then he was standing, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that spoke of promises and futures and a love that had been forged in fire and emerged stronger for it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Julie looked down at the ring on her finger, overlapping the one from their contract marriage, symbolic of old and new beginning to merge. Should we set a date? She asked. How about we take our time? Peter suggested. Plan something that's actually ours, not rushed or forced. Maybe next spring, when the cherry blossoms are blooming in the park. That sounds perfect. They stood together on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, and watched the city settle into night. Somewhere below, life continued. People living and loving and struggling through their own complicated stories. Somewhere a few floors down, Elena was unpacking boxes and taking her first steps toward reclaiming her life. And somewhere in a maximum security prison, Dmitry Kovac was learning what it meant to lose everything. But here, in this moment, Peter and Julie had everything they needed. Love, trust, a future built not on contracts and convenience, but on genuine choice. Thank you, Peter said softly. For what? For staying. For choosing this, even when it was hard and messy and probably seemed impossible. For loving me enough to wait through the chaos. Julie turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his face. Thank you for letting me in. For trusting me with your secrets and your pain and your sister. For showing me that love doesn't have to be simple to be real. He kissed her again, tender and sweet, and Julie felt the last pieces of their story falling into place. Not an ending, but a beginning. The real one. The one they'd both been waiting for. They went inside eventually, hands still linked, and began the work of building their life together. Not perfectly, not without struggles and setbacks and moments of doubt, but together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. They'd been forced into marriage by circumstance, had built a partnership through danger, and had fallen in love in the spaces between crisis and resolution. Now they had the rest of their lives to discover what came after. And Julie couldn't wait. 1 year later, the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, painting the park in shades of pink and white that looked like something out of a dream. Julie stood at the end of a rose-petal-strewn aisle, wearing a dress that was all her choice this time. Simple, elegant, the kind of gown that made her feel beautiful instead of suffocated. At the other end, Peter waited with Marcus at his side. But that wasn't what made Julie's heart swell. It was Elena standing opposite Marcus, serving as Julie's maid of honor, wearing a soft lavender dress and a smile that reached her eyes. She'd come so far in the past year, therapy, support groups, even enrolling part-time in medical school, to finish the degree she'd been forced to abandon. She still had hard days, still carried scars that would never fully fade. But she was healing, growing, living. The music started, and Julie walked down the aisle, not given away by anyone, but choosing her own path. When she reached Peter, the look in his eyes made everything they'd been through worth it. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," she whispered back. This time when they said their vows, they meant every word. This time when they kissed, it wasn't performance but promise. This time when they were pronounced husband and wife, it was real in every way that mattered. And as they walked back down the aisle together, hands linked and smiles genuine, Julie caught Elena's eye. Peter's sister was crying. Happy tears, the kind that came from witnessing love triumph over trauma. And she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Julie smiled back, understanding without words. They'd all saved each other in the end. And that was the greatest love story of all. The end. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and situations portrayed in this narrative are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people or real events is purely coincidental. This content is intended for entertainment purposes